Hey everybody, welcome to the first official anti-tech workshop. Now, just to clarify off the bat, this is not because I am anti-tech. It is simply because I have a feeling that most people in the world are actually using AI wrong. And so I am using these as a series of workshops to help set the record straight. Because here is the deal. What AI is a way to go 100 times faster, but also fail 100 times harder if you're not careful with how you set it up and how you use it. And so I am creating this series. It's going to happen bi-weekly in terms of these workshops, but I'm also going to start posting them on YouTube so that everybody can gain the valuable knowledge that is being shared. So today's workshop is for leaders and business owners who have services that are priced at like 15,000 or higher, and you usually work with B2B. Now, does that mean that it won't be valuable for other people? If you have a business model that relies on client retention, then you may want to stick around. But specifically, we are going to be talking about how modern client discovery is a way for you to easily increase your profit margin. So without further ado, let's dive into the good stuff so that you and I can figure out how we can start making much more money in our businesses. So here is the problem, right? The fact is, we live in an instant gratification society with many people like always looking for that next quick win. What does that do though? That creates an early churn problem, meaning your client retention is not as long as you would like it to be, especially if you're a service business that relies on the subscription model. So the fact is that 1 in every 3 B2B clients actually leaves in the first 90 days because they have a bad starting experience. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they purchased and you ghosted them or left them on red. It just means that the expectations were not met. And the problem is that first 90 days is really how somebody gauges whether or not you're worth continuing to employ, right, as a subscription, especially with nowadays. People have a lot of subscription model businesses that they are subscribed to. So if you're not valuable in the sense that if a business owner doesn't wake up and think, I can't operate my business without this service, then you're going to be put on the chopping block. But here's the part that I want everyone to pay attention to, because simply a 5% increase in your client retention could lead to a 25 to 95 profit margin increase. Hang on, let me make sure that I say that again so we all understand what is on the line. If you get your client onboarding right and you get an A+ gold star in the first 90 days of the businesses that you're helping, then you could potentially increase your profit margin by 25 to 95%. And that's only by retaining 5 more percent of the people that you're losing to, natural causes, let's say. So let that sink in for a second, because whatever your churn rate is, if you could diminish it by 5%, you could potentially increase your profit margin by 25 to 95%. So I don't know what the math is for you on that, but no matter what, that's a crazy increase, right? So let's talk about how we could actually do this. But before we talk about how to do it, we first have to understand where the gaps are. Because if we don't know, so we know what we're fixing, we know what we're aiming for, but if we don't know what is falling between the cracks in terms of how your current onboarding process is set up to strategically retain your clients over the long haul, then if we don't know where the logic, what I call the logic leak zones, but if we don't know where the gaps are, we don't know where to fill the holes, right? So the first one is the context capture gap. What this means, I've been a tech consultant for nearly a decade now, and the reality is that there is no amount of meetings where you can gather the information you truly need to make an impact on a business. I mean, without spending, many, many hours in a room collecting that information. Now, if you're a business that does like an intake form, or you do some sort of questionnaire, or you're gathering your intel via email, then your context capture gap is big, because those types of ways to collect information are really missing the backstory behind the answers that you're gathering. So let's say you have a 40 question intake form. Not only are people not really answering it with the most oomph and giving you the information that you're really after, the other problem is you're actually missing the context behind those answers. And as a business technical consultant, the context behind those answers actually guided the solutions that I gave people. So I have a hunch, even if you're a marketing agency, if you're an automation agency, if you implement AI, I know that you're facing the exact same challenge. That context is key, but your intake form or your survey or your onboarding process where people are just answering static questions is not giving you the information you truly need to make a difference, especially on a quick timeline, because that's what people are expecting now. So the second is the if I could read, the decision ownership gap. Now, one of these aspects is that there is a crazy stat that like 70% of businesses think that you should have all the information you need to help them before your first call. Now, as a business technical consultant, I can tell you 100%, there is no way for me to have gathered that information before the first call. Now, can I have some, insight into where we're headed? Yeah. But could I have had all the answers by the first call? Like, no, it's just unrealistic, right? So the decision ownership gap, though, is clearly established roles and ownership responsibilities. So when it comes to being an agency, being a consultancy, you're having to clearly define for the client who's responsible for what. Now, a lot of this, like I said, like some crazy high number believes you should just, have a crystal ball and understand things before they're told to you. It's unrealistic expectations. However, if you're able to fill that gap by clearly establishing who does what and why, then you aren't going to fall into that trap where people expect you to know things before you're able to even ask the questions. So the decision ownership gap is one that just comes from clarification. But if you don't say it, then you don't actually know people know. When I was working in restaurants when I was younger, I would train people, right? And we'd open the silverware drawer and I'd be like, okay, forks go here, knives go here, big spoons go here, and little spoons go here. And there'd even be labels on the plastic bin that's holding all the silverware. And people would look at me like, I'm not stupid, like I can read. And I was always like, well, if I don't actually tell you, then and you do it wrong, then it is my fault because I technically trained you. So even if it seems like something somebody should already know, it's worth it for you to say it because then that takes the responsibility off you and onto them. So let's fill that gap. It's an easy one. The third one, the order of operations gap. Now, in the first 90 days, sometimes it's kind of hard, especially because I was building CRM ecosystems and I had no idea on the way in how I could really help them because it always came out through the information they would give me. What was really the answer, like the problem they were facing, and what was the answer they really truly needed? So the fact is, the order of operations is simply just a structure so that your clients understand how the order of go, right? So if that means that first you just do discovery and then you create a plan and a timeline and then you lay out all the tasks, like whatever your order of operations is. Now, I laid them out as I was a senior Salesforce consultant, that's what we would do. However, if you're a marketing agency, then, it would look a little different. It would be getting your branding, understanding your branding, collecting your copy, understanding, what campaigns you're trying to build, and so on and so forth. So the fact is, no matter what service business you have, that you just by clearly establishing the order of operations, then your clients understand the boxes that need to be checked, right? So it becomes a to-do list. Everything, all that I'm saying, all of these gaps is so that everything gets simplified and that your client has very clear expectations, not only what they can expect from you, but what you can in turn expect from them. So the order of operations gap, again, same with the decision owner gap. It's simple clarification. However, I can tell you it'll pay dividends based on some of the statistics that for this workshop specifically, we're talking about client onboarding, right? We're talking about after the sale is made. And based on the statistics about how many people are churning clients on on their onboarding process, it's pretty clear that while these gaps seem very simple, it's things that people aren't doing, and therefore they are paying in their profit margin because they're not being clear. So the fourth one is the manual reconciliation gap. Now, this is about how you collect that information. So, for instance, if you're doing an intake form and you're communicating via email, or you're communicating via a Slack group, or, so on and so forth. All this means is how many different manual places do you have to go to reconcile all of the information on any one given project? Now, I have a feeling, especially because even the consultancy that I worked for, we were dealing with enterprise level clients, which means that they had anywhere from 500 to 1,000 employees, right? These are big companies. And even we struggled with this manual reconciliation. So I am just, I have a hunch that most people actually struggle with this, but they don't see it as a problem because they fall into the nostalgia trap of that's just how we've always done it. Now, is that wrong? No. You've been doing it, right? The question you have to ask yourself, though, is there a better way? Now, the answer is always yes, because the fact is, just because you don't know what it is doesn't mean somebody else doesn't know what it is. So the fact is, yes, there is always a better way. So the question just becomes, have you asked yourself, how many different places do you need to go to get information about one project? If the answer is more than 3, then guaranteed there is a better way. So that if you have a manual reconciliation gap, the fact is that at some point your client may ask you a question and you may go, oh crap, I got to go look through all the email threads to get the answer to that. And when you're working with a company that has 500 employees that could potentially all be emailing you, I can tell you firsthand, sometimes it's hard to find those tiny little answers in the hundreds of email threads that you are a part of, and especially the ones that you're just CC'd on for no reason. So a little bit of venting. Hopefully that's not the same thing that's happening to you. However, I have a feeling it happens to everybody in the service industry in their own way. So the fifth one is the visibility to the client gap. Now, this is how do you balance, the service delivery with showing them how the sausage is made, and then also not showing them exactly how the sausage is made. The same way that when you go into a restaurant, sometimes the kitchen is behind a wall and the magic food door comes out and the person comes out with the cooked food, versus sometimes there's kitchens that have a window so that you can actually see the kitchen, you can see into how the sausage is made, but you're also not invited to sit in the kitchen. So there's things that you are privy to, and then there's things that you're not privy to. So the fact is, the visibility to the client gap is different for each individual business. However, like I said, whether you have a wall and the food magically comes out, that means that you have to be, the visibility to the client is your communication so that they understand when the food's going to come out. Versus if you show them the window, then they're able to look inside and potentially see it for themselves, but that is a different structure. So, I keep using my restaurant analogies, which is just to show that there's also more than one way to do this correctly. The fact, though, is that some people are just not accounting for this, meaning the visibility to the client gap is that it's invisible, meaning that they actually don't have the information they need to feel secure of what is happening. So these are the 5 logic leak zones, in that these are potential ways that your client onboarding is accidentally leaking a bunch of your clients and increasing your client churn or decreasing your client retention, meaning how long the client chooses to work with you. And like we saw in the last slide, 1 in 3 B2B service clients choose not to work with the business that they started working with after 90 days. And this is because of these 5 gaps that are outlined here. So now that we understand what the problem is, where we're leaking, and the potential for how we can actually, if we make these improvements, how it's actually going to transform our business in the form of just a 5% retention increase is a 25 to 95 improvement on your profit margin. Now that we know the potential upside of focusing on this for, just 30, 45 minutes, however long this lasts, it's not going to be that long. Now let's talk about how we actually improve on getting that increase. So this is called the first win reality. So when it comes to your service, the question just simply becomes, from the time they say yes, in the sense of yes to the sale, how long does it take between that moment and their first win? Now, a first win doesn't mean everything's transformed, you've lost 100 pounds, you've made $20 million. Like, the first win is just the first win. But the question is, how long does it take for them to give you money, for them to see a return on that investment? Now, that could be, if you're a marketing agency, in the form of more engagement. That could be in the form of more leads generated. If you're a sales agency, like more calls booked. So, or if, say, they're not even ready for more calls booked, then the offer being ready to go so that you can promote it for more calls booked. All of those are a win, a return on the investment that they made in that yes. So the question you have to ask yourself, how long does it take for somebody to see their first win from the moment that they give you money? So here are some simple facts that help understand the true value of the first win, because there is a, like we were talking about earlier, a mere 5% increase in customer retention increases your profit margin by 25 to 95%. That is just insane. And that is not that much more retention. For how many clients you have, 5% of that sticking around for a little bit longer, that is crazy math. That's a crazy impact. And people are totally underestimating onboarding it at this point. So there's another fact, though, that everybody knows innately, but people don't necessarily practice it in reality. And that is that it is more expensive to acquire a new client than it is to sell a client you already have something else. So and also, because you've already established that relationship, you're 5 to 25 times more expensive. So whatever your CAC is, whatever your cost to acquire a new client is, it's 5 to 25 times more expensive to get a new client than it is to retain an existing one. So simply by focusing on improving your onboarding, improving the first 90 days of your service, not only are you going to have a huge upside on your profit margin, but you're also going to diminish your cost to acquire new clients because you've already increased that profit margin, meaning you're going to need less clients. Like, it's just such a win, 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 win. Like, you'd almost think I'm lying, but these statistics are backed up by studies that have been done. Now, this 90-day churn window, roughly 33%, or 1 in 3 of these B2B clients churn within the first 90 days because their onboarding experience is poor. So the fact is, there's a direct correlation between client retention and client onboarding. Because I think the problem is, and this is just my theory, people think of the sale as mission accomplished, right? When really that is just the starting line. The whole getting them to actually buy your product. People view that the whole lead and sale process as the whole game. But when somebody actually agrees to work with you, that is essentially the starting line. And that is, when the journey really starts. And so I just have a theory that people focus way more on getting the sale and not as much on what happens once you make the sale. But as you can see from these statistics, once you make the sale is way more valuable than the sale itself. So let's now talk about how we can actually build a client onboarding system that really helps you increase your profit margin, for one, but improve your client's experience with your business. So this client context capture, the old way, that 40-question static form. We already talked about that, right? Also, the gap, though, we've established the fact that you don't get all the information you need to make a true difference. So the new way, and this is a great way to implement AI in your business, where AI is not given some huge responsibility. It's given kind of a secretary role, an intern role, a role where they are potentially interviewing your client, so that not only are you gathering the same information from those same 40 questions, you're also gathering the context behind that information. So the new way is guided, it's adaptive, and it's a pre-call conversation. So, like, for instance, in service businesses, most people meet on Zoom, or you meet in real life, or in person. In real life, it's all in real life. The point is, that this is all the information that you can gather before your first call, meaning that 70% that thinks you need to know everything before you have your first call, they're definitely not going to be 100% appeased because it's not realistic. However, they are definitely going to be a heck of a lot happier because you will have a ton of context that you can lean on if you collect that context and information correctly. And this is a great way to utilize AI in your business in a safe way that's not going to go rogue. So, the worth it lock. Now, this first 90 days is tentative because it is it's your judgment day, if you will. It is how the client actually gauges the ROI of working with you and then continuing to work with you for the long haul. So, the old way is vague expectations. We talked about those 5 specific logic leak gaps where it's not difficult information. These answers you already know off the top of your head. But the question then becomes, have you clearly established them, or are they buried in like a 20-page contract? Like, the fact is that just because you say it one time in one way doesn't mean it was actually heard the first time. So it's not just about having vague expectations. It's, are you communicating clearly and ensuring the fact that your client hears those expectations being communicated? So the new way is by having your client make their own measurable definition of, was this worth it? Now, in this call, I'm going to introduce you to a way to actually do all of these things that I'm talking to you about, and that is part of the first win architecture. But the fact is, if you can have your client establish their own ROI, because everybody thinks of ROI differently. I'm going to tell you a very quick story. I worked with this boss where when I implemented their new process, he came to me and he was like, I think you made it too easy because nobody trusts it. And it was very funny because his whole reaction to everything was comical the entire time I was working with them. But one of the main things that I saw, because when I went to say, like, this is what this process did, it returned, what would that be? 3 to 5 hours. So for a 5-person team, 3 to 5 hours per person per month. So when you added it all up, it was almost 400 hours per year, right? So I come to him and I show him this, right? And that to him was kind of like, meh. But then when I broke it down as, by the way, what that translates into is this much money, which turned out to be almost 60 grand a year, not only in salary, but potential revenue because those hours are being used on a non-billable task instead of money he could be charging his clients. All of a sudden he went, oh, wow. So returning 400 hours, he was like, meh, whatever. Returning 60 grand, he was like, aye, captain. But the fact is, it was the exact same results, but his ROI, what was more important to him, was the revenue side. The project management team, where I said, here's your 400 hours back, they were much more excited about that. So the fact is that by having your client determine their own ROI, you can communicate from the go exactly in the language that they view as valuable. And this isn't to, give them fake numbers. Like I said, all those numbers it was the same thing either way. It was just in a different frame. So you need your client to frame it for themselves. So the last one, there's actually 5, but we only have time to go over 3. The first win hypothesis. This is about how long, like I said, it takes you to go from yes to that first win. So the old way is having a first call, a kickoff call, if you will. If you've ever had one of those, you know what I'm talking about. A discovery kickoff call where the person leading the meeting has a moment where there's kind of this essence of, okay, so tell me about your business. And you essentially are starting from square one. So the fact is that if that's where you're starting, meaning from the time that they sign the contract to the first call being, so what are we doing? And you have a kickoff slide deck, like if you have a PowerPoint presentation as your first call, we got to talk. But the fact is that that's the old way, and the new way has higher expectations. I'm sorry, but with AI and the advancement of technology, there are ways for you to move faster and actually work like it's working easier. I promise you this is an easier way to do it. But the fact is that with these higher expectations means that we are now, as consultants, agencies, service providers, we are now being held to a higher standard because the technology has improved. So the first win hypothesis is that if we can draft that first win a lot earlier and make it measurable by in your client's own words, then it basically locks in your client retention for the long haul, because you can prove to them that you are doing exactly what they want in their own language. Now, like I said, I look at hours being returned as much more valuable than the money being returned. But for the client, the money resonated with him more. So if you could have your client predetermine exactly what they want their ROI to look like, that you can always speak their language and frame everything the way they actually want it to be framed. So let's do a little bit of a self-assessment and talk about why this part is impactful. So if you still rely on static intake forms, Google type form, anything that is multiple choice where clients are, half-assing their answers, and there's actually a statistic where only 20% are completing. So let's be real. Take that back. What I'm saying is, if you're using a static form, you could increase your depth and the actual completion of those forms by 20% by transitioning from static to conversational. So the low engagement and completion rates can be increased by transitioning from static to conversational. What does that really mean? It means more context. It means more words. It means that they're not just answering multiple choice. They're actually telling you why they're picking that answer. So if you have a static form, then that's going to be a mark on your test. The second thing is how many days pass between the yes and the first win. Now, we've talked about this a few times within this workshop, but the question remains, have you answered this question for yourself? How long, once a client agrees to work with you, how long does it take for you to get their first win? Now, like I said, the first win doesn't need to mean like you made them $10,000. Like, the first win is the first win. The first little accomplishment where someone actually says to themselves, this person was worth the money. So whatever that is for you and your business, if you're an agency, if you're a consultancy, everybody provides a different service. They're all valuable in their own way. So what does your first win look like? And more importantly, how long does it take for you to get it? Because like I said, it's 73%. That was when I was like, it's a crazy high number, but 73% cited that they did not see value early enough. And that's the reason that they left the service that was being provided for them. So do you have a short-term win strategy? Okay, last one. Are your experts spending their time asking, so tell me about your business, in a kickoff call with a slide deck? And like I said, I've been a tech consultant for 10 years, so I promise you that I know this was the old way, right? It's not wrong. It's just a question of, have you actually, moved along with the times? Have you updated? Have you, changed your philosophy at all? Because the answer is that there are many, many more options out there to make this process go faster and for it to be easier for your business to collect the information you need to make a bigger impact, because 94% of B2B buyers research a vendor before they contact them, and they expect you to do that same research on them. So if you had a way in your onboarding process to have your client provide that information, then you could kill two birds with one stone. Sorry, PETA. But the point is that if your onboarding process included a way for you to learn about that business in a deep contextual scenario, then you're not only going to satisfy part of the onboarding process where somebody thinks that the whole process is moving forward, you're also satisfying that need for businesses to feel like they've been seen and heard, and that you've done the research so that they feel understood and seen. It sounds very silly, but that's basic human nature. The first step of communication is listening. People want to feel seen and heard. And so, as a B2B service business, if your onboarding process reflects them feeling seen and heard, you're going to hang on to your clients longer because it's feeding a human need, not just a business one, a human one. It's going to set you apart. So, the yes first win architecture has 5 steps in it. Like I said, I don't want this call to be that long, so let's quickly go over them. We already went over the client context capture, meaning the information you're collecting from your client before you start working with them. The worth it lock, meaning in their own words, what is the ROI that they prefer. The win hypothesis, how long it takes for them to get their first quick win, meaning when is their first dopamine hit after working with you. I'm sorry to make it sound like a drug, but the fact is, if you can get somebody to feel good about working with you, they're going to want to keep working with you. Basic, right? 4 is the first win build. Now, this is after the first quick win, but that's the establishment of the timeline and laying those expectations super clearly so that your client never feels lost in translation. They always feel like they're making progress. They always feel like they are moving, they have momentum towards the transformation that you provide. Because the fact is, business is all about improvement. If I'm helping you improve your technological setup. Do you know how to do that? Probably not. But if I lay out the steps very clearly, then you understand exactly where we are on the road from now, where your tech is a mess, to your tech feeling like not a hindrance to the work that you're doing. Now, whatever business you're in, it's going to look different for your business and the service you provide, but it's the same idea. Like, does your client understand all the steps to get to the ideal transformation? And the last one is renewal positioning. The fact is, if you already know in their own words the ROI that they want to see, and you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that working with you has demonstrated that ROI, then renewal positioning is a rhetorical question. And it's never going to be no, because if you're able to get them more leads, get them more sales, help them produce more content, so on and so forth. Like for me, help them improve their onboarding so their client retention increases, then it doesn't become a question of renewal. It's not an if, it's when. So this is where Dorris plugs in. So the old way is static forms. The new way is a way for you to use AI to have a fully guided conversation with your client before the call, and without you actually having to be there. So the fact is that Dorris acts as an intern. She acts as a secretary, and it's a way for her to ask the questions of expanding on the context. So instead of going into your first kickoff call with a slide deck and you're telling them all the basic information that they need to know about working with you, you're heading into that call with, okay, so I see you've answered it this way. Can I ask you a few more questions about that? Can we clarify what you said here? And instead of the very basic discovery call of, hey, so tell me about yourself, it starts with a bang in that, okay, so I see that you said this. So can we talk more about why this is a problem, or how this impacts your business on whatever level, right? If you're a marketing person, talking about campaigns, like, so what have you seen about your previous campaigns that haven't worked, right? Well, Dorris, and when you're looking at that conversation, Dorris pulled out this piece of information that was really interesting, and I'm curious if we could talk more about that, because that would guide the new direction that we're headed in. Now, of course, that was all very vague. It was all very metaphorical, representative of you getting the information you need to make an impact faster. But this is a way also to use AI in your business so that it's not taking over your business. It's not actually doing the work for you. It's helping you do your work better, because the same way that conversation I was just mimicking, right? when I was a tech consultant, I used to have to show up live because this is before AI existed, right? Or at least before it was mainstream. I had to show up to all those calls and ask those questions to get that information that we needed in order to make the impact on the business. But now there's a way where I wouldn't have to have shown up for those calls to ask those questions. I could have had Dorris ask those questions for me. So when we go into the room and we are actually making the plan, the questions we're asking are so much more specific because we have so much more information. And the best part about it is nobody has time to sit on 100 client calls. So if you're able to facilitate these conversations in your off time, then you can move further faster simply by having Dorris collect that information for you. So that concludes the first anti-tech workshop. Like I said, this is not because I'm anti-tech. I'm simply use it for everything. I think that there are more strategic ways for you to actually use technology in your business where you can truly make an impact on the ROI that matters to you. And client retention, if that could increase your profit margin by 25 to 95%, I have a hunch that some of you might pique your curiosity in the sense of, so wait, how can we do that? So if you're interested, I offer 30-minute discovery calls for an onboarding audit where we talk about your current process, how it currently works, and more importantly, some ideas for how we could actually help your clients get their first wins faster and improving your client retention, because that first 90 days is so important. And the problem is everybody focuses on making the sale and not what happens after the sale. So here is your next step. I want to expose where you're leaking. As we went over, there are 5 pretty big buckets that tend to collect a lot of leaks. And this isn't about any individual business. This is service businesses in general. And each business tends to struggle with their own individual leak. So where your logic leak is to be determined. In addition to the fact that I use my own version of Dorris to find that leak. So I'm not just going to sell you something that I've never used before. It's something I actually use to do the exact same task. I need you to tell me how to help you, and then we can work toward building out that solution. So if you're interested, there's a QR code on the screen. I also will include a link down below. So if you're interested in increasing your client retention rate, then simply, you know where to find me, but from the link or from the QR code. So this was the first official anti-tech workshop. I am looking forward to hosting these every other week. You will see all of my invitations on LinkedIn, and then subsequently all of these will be posted on my YouTube channel so that everybody can get this information, because information is free now. The question is what you do with it. So curious. If you're interested, then I will see you on that call. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.